Hello, brave souls, and welcome to Midnight Memoirs. This is where untold horrors and ghostly echoes meet, pulling you slowly into restless nights wrapped in shadows. Before tonight's story begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're called by these dark, mysterious nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a tale when midnight strikes. Now, turn off the lights, stay very still, and let's disappear into the darkness together. My parents once decided to take my younger sister and me on a short weekend trip. Nothing fancy, just a small break from routine. They booked a stay at Manresa Castle, an old manor that had once been used as a monastery. They didn't really explain much about the place before we arrived. They just said it was historic and interesting. That alone was enough to hook me. I was already a history nerd back then, the kind of kid who loved old buildings, old stories, and anything that felt like it had survived another time. The idea of staying somewhere ancient felt exciting, almost magical. When we arrived, the building immediately lived up to everything I had imagined. It didn't feel like a normal hotel. The stone walls were thick, the ceilings high, and the hallways long and narrow. Everything echoed just a little too much. The air felt cool and heavy, like the building was holding on to centuries of silence. I remember feeling thrilled and uneasy at the same time, though I didn't recognize the unease right away. My parents were given a room separate from my sister and me. Their room was at the end of the hall, and it felt noticeably more modern. Their bathroom was attached directly to their room, which made it feel more private and normal. My sister and I, on the other hand, were assigned a room right in the middle of the hallway, directly across from the staircase. Our bathroom wasn't attached to our room. It was down the hall, on the way to my parents' room. That bathroom bothered me immediately. I don't know how else to say it. There was no obvious reason. It wasn't dirty. It wasn't broken. It didn't smell bad. It just felt wrong. I went in there once, just once, to use the toilet. The moment I stepped inside, I felt deeply uncomfortable, like I was intruding on something I shouldn't be. The room felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The air felt thick and still, and there was this strange pressure, like the room was watching me. I finished as quickly as I could and left. After that, I refused to use it again. Every single time I needed the bathroom, I insisted on going all the way down to my parents' room. I didn't explain it very well at the time. I just said it felt weird. My parents laughed it off, assuming I was being dramatic or overly sensitive. Even now, I can't fully explain what bothered me so much about it. I just knew I didn't want to be in there. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I've always been a night owl, even as a kid. And being in a new place made it worse. Our room was uncomfortably hot, probably due to some old heating system that hadn't been updated in decades. On top of that, there was a streetlight outside the window that shone directly into the room. I've never slept well with light, and this was especially irritating. The walls and doors in the castle were thin, far thinner than you'd expect from such an old, solid-looking building. I could hear everything. Other guests coming back from nights out, laughing softly, walking down the hall, whispering to each other and shushing one another as they passed rooms. Every footstep echoed. Every door opening or closing sounded louder than it should have. Eventually, things quieted down. The hallway settled. The sounds faded. By then, it was probably around midnight. That's when I heard the doorknob. It wasn't a single sharp movement. It was a slow, deliberate jiggling, like someone was trying to open the door carefully, testing it. My heart jumped instantly. What made it even stranger was that I hadn't heard anyone walk up to the door. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of the handle moving. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. The doorknob stopped. My sister stirred beside me, irritated at being woken up. She asked what I was doing and why I was talking. I asked her if she heard anything. She said no, rolled over, and went back to sleep almost immediately. That made it worse. If she hadn't heard it, then maybe it was just my imagination. But it had sounded so real. I lay there awake for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling, listening for any other sounds. And nothing else happened that night, but it took me a long time to fall asleep. The next day passed without incident. We explored the area, enjoyed the views, and did typical vacation things. I felt mostly fine during the day. The unease seemed tied to the building at night, when everything quieted down and the shadows stretched longer than they should. That night, our last night at the castle, I was in my parents' room. I had just taken a shower and was getting ready for bed. My parents were watching a documentary about Star Wars, one of my dad's favorite things in the world. I had grown up on those movies, so I sat down with them and watched for a while. The room felt normal, comfortable, safe. Then we heard a loud bang. It came from the wall we shared with the neighboring room. It wasn't subtle. It was sharp and sudden, or like someone had slammed into the wall or hit it hard with their hand. All three of us jumped. After a moment, we laughed it off. Since my parents' room was at the end of the hall and shared a wall with another room, we assumed the neighbors were annoyed by the TV volume. We lowered the sound, muttering about how a simple knock would have been enough. Nothing else happened after that, and eventually we all went to bed. The next morning, while we were eating breakfast, my dad mentioned something odd. He said that earlier, while brushing his teeth, he overheard the people in the next room talking. One of them asked the other if they had heard the loud bang the night before. The other person said yes. They both seemed confused by it and wondered out loud what it had been. That stuck with me. They hadn't caused the noise. And they had heard it too. After breakfast, it was time to check out. As we were getting ready to leave, I finally noticed something in the lobby that I hadn't seen before. There was a collection of books laid out, filled with handwritten anecdotes and printed stories from guests. They were all about strange experiences and hauntings in the castle. That was when things clicked into place. I started flipping through the books, curiosity turning into a slow, sinking feeling. Story after story described unexplained sounds, strange sensations, and encounters that felt uncomfortably familiar. Then I found the one about the bathroom. The bathroom I had refused to use. According to one account, a man and his son had once come up the stairs and heard someone sobbing inside that bathroom. The crying sounded intense, heartbreaking. They knocked on the door and asked if everything was okay, but the sobbing continued, uninterrupted. Concerned, they went downstairs to get a staff member. When the staff member unlocked the door and opened it, the crying stopped instantly. The bathroom was empty. The floor, however, was completely covered in used tissues. I felt sick reading that. Another section of the book talked about the far end of the hall, the area opposite my parents' room. There was a tower room there, and it had a long history of disturbing experiences. Someone, accounts differed on whether it had been a monk or a bride-to-be, had hanged themselves in that room. Since then, guests had reported waking up feeling watched. Some said they felt hands pressing on their backs. Others said they struggled to breathe, like something was constricting their chest. One woman claimed she woke up with deep scratches running down her back. As I closed the book, I realized just how little my parents had told us before bringing us there. They hadn't wanted to scare us. They hadn't known themselves, but suddenly everything made sense. The bathroom, the doorknob, the bang, the constant feeling of being observed. Nothing dramatic had happened to me. Nothing overtly violent or unmistakably supernatural. But the building had left an impression on me that I still carry. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a quiet, persistent unease, like the sense that some places hold on to what happened in them. Even now, years later, I can remember exactly how that bathroom felt. I can remember the sound of the doorknob moving. I can remember the way the castle felt at night, alive in a way that had nothing to do with people. I don't know what I believe about haunted places. I don't claim to have seen a ghost or been attacked by anything unseen, but I do believe that some buildings remember, and sometimes, if you're paying attention, they let you feel it. I don't believe in ghosts or haunted houses. I never have. I'm the kind of person who looks for practical explanations first and usually finds them. Even now, I'm not claiming anything supernatural was happening. All I know is that I lived in this house for about a year, and I've never felt anything like it before or since. Whatever was going on in that place was wrong, and it affected all of us in ways that still don't fully make sense. Before we moved in, there were already stories about the house. A lot of them. According to local rumor, it had once been a tenant house for prostitutes way back when. After that, it supposedly became a trap house and was eventually raided by the DEA. The landlord actually confirmed the raid part, though none of the more extreme details were ever officially verified. People said they found a dead body, huge amounts of drugs, all the worst things you'd expect to hear. After that, the house sat empty for several years before it was put back on the market. That's when we came along. There were 4 of us, all broke college students, desperate for cheap rent and not very picky. When we toured the house, it was clearly in bad shape, but we brushed it off. There was strange graffiti and writing on the walls, most of it partially hidden behind yellowed, peeling floral wallpaper. Thick cobwebs clung to the corners of rooms and ceilings. It was obvious that people had been squatting there on and off. There were empty chip bags in corners, and one room smelled strongly of urine. We laughed it off and called it character. Looking back, that feels unbelievably stupid, but at the time, we were more focused on affordability than common sense. On move-in day, things already felt off. While unpacking my room, I found the broken end of a syringe plunger shoved into the corner. There were also dark stains on the floor that I hadn't noticed during the tour. I tried not to think too hard about what they might be. My room was the smallest in the house, barely bigger than a closet. It had a tiny window that looked directly at a brick wall, a door that wouldn't stay closed, and a strange bump in the middle of the floor. We later learned the house had originally been 2 separate buildings that were merged together sometime in the mid-1960s. That explained some of the odd layout, but not the feeling. Not long after we settled in, weird things started happening, not all at once and not dramatically, just enough to keep you unsettled. Our one roommate started complaining that he could hear a dog barking through his air vent. It happened fairly often. We didn't own a dog, and none of the neighboring houses were close enough for it to make sense. It wasn't distant either. It sounded like it was right there, inside the walls. Another roommate had a much worse experience. He would wake up in the morning to find objects moved around his room. At first it was small things, like books or chairs. Then one morning, his desk had clearly been shifted. He was positive it hadn't been like that when he went to sleep. To rule out sleepwalking, he started locking his door every night and even set up a voice recorder to capture sounds while he slept. The recordings picked up nothing. No movement, no footsteps, not even breathing. All of us, at different times, we saw shadows of people who weren't there. Usually out of the corner of your eye, a shape passing a doorway, a figure standing at the end of the hall that vanished when you looked directly at it. It happened most often at night, but not always. One afternoon, in broad daylight, I heard screaming coming from one of the bathrooms. Not vague noises, not something you could mistake for pipes or water pressure. It sounded like a woman screaming in terror. The closer I got to the bathroom, the louder it became. My heart was pounding by the time I reached the door. When I flipped the light switch on, the screaming stopped instantly. The bathroom was empty. That exact thing happened again another week. Both times were on Tuesdays. Food spoiled unusually fast in that house. Bread would mold the same day we bought it, or the next day at the latest. We tried different brands, different stores, same result. At the time we joked about it, but it was strange. Sometimes the entire house would suddenly smell like something had died. Not garbage, not sewage. The unmistakable smell of decay. It would come out of nowhere and disappear just as suddenly. We eventually blamed it on possums. Because yes, there were possums living in the ceiling. We could hear them moving around at night. Scratching, thumping. We knew they were up there, but we couldn't get into the attic because we didn't have the key. The landlord dragged his feet about it. The ceilings were made of that cheap, flimsy material you see in old schools, the kind that stains and sags easily. It didn't help our peace of mind. Then there were the flies. Every time it rained over the summer, those swarms of tiny fruit flies would appear in our front yard. Not a few, hundreds, thousands. They would force their way into the house through the cracks under the doors and windows. We tried traps, sprays, ceiling gaps. Nothing worked. After every storm, the house would fill with them. Up until this point, everything could still be explained away, at least in theory. Bad house, bad luck, pests, stress. But then things escalated. One day, we found a knife lying out in the open. No one recognized it. No one claimed it. No one knew where it came from. It hadn't been there before. Not long after that, one of the sinks started dripping blood. Not pouring. Dripping. Slow, steady drops, like something out of a bad horror movie. We checked the pipes. We checked the walls. There was no visible source. Eventually, it stopped on its own. One evening, all the lights in the house went out, not all at once, one by one, room by room. They stayed off for about 10 minutes. We checked the breakers. Everything was fine. The power in the rest of the neighborhood was fine too. Then, just as slowly, the lights came back on. Another night, 2 of us were sitting on the couch watching TV. When we turned it off, the dark screen reflected the room behind us. In that reflection, we saw a man standing there, wearing a hat. We both turned around instantly. No one was there. We heard a phone ringing more than once, not a modern ringtone. An old-fashioned rotary phone sound like something from the 1960s. None of us owned a phone like that. We all had cell phones, all with distinct ringtones. A window opened on its own. We heard footsteps walking across the roof at night. When we went outside to check, there was nothing there. One day, while we were all out grabbing lunch together, the microwave somehow flipped upside down. It wasn't near the edge of the counter. There was no sign it had slid or fallen naturally. And then there was the worst one. One morning, we woke up and found a pool of blood standing in the kitchen, not splattered, not smeared, just a dark, wet pool on the floor. There was no trail leading to it, no cuts on any of us, no explanation. To this day, none of us can explain where it came from. At some point, it all became a joke. We started calling the house possessed. We made a drinking game out of every new strange event. Laughing about it felt safer than taking it seriously. But the truth was, none of us slept well that entire year. We all had nightmares, constantly. Deep, vivid ones that left you exhausted when you woke up. One roommate eventually stopped sleeping there altogether. He'd started dating someone new and basically moved in with her after a week, just to avoid spending nights in the house. Our mental health declined across the board. We fought constantly. Small disagreements turned into major blow-ups. We were angry, anxious, and on edge all the time. The moment we moved out, things improved, not slowly, immediately. Our sleep got better. Our moods stabilized. The tension between us faded. I still don't claim to believe in ghosts. I don't have a neat explanation for what happened in that house, and I'm not sure I want one. All I know is that something about that place was deeply wrong, and living there felt like being slowly worn down by something you couldn't see. Like I said, I don't believe in ghost stories, but I'll be damned if I didn't spend a year in hell. I should probably start with some context. I'm an identical twin. When this happened, we were 3 years old. At the time, we were living in Liverpool, England. Even though World War II had ended about 20 years earlier, the damage was still everywhere. The city and the surrounding countryside hadn't fully healed. There were still collapsed buildings, burnt-out shells of houses, and empty foundations where entire lives had once existed. As a child, you don't necessarily understand what you're seeing, but the landscape carries a weight anyway. Ruins have a way of doing that. One summer, my family decided to take a vacation. It wasn't anything fancy. We stayed at a seaside camping park, the kind of place families went for a cheap getaway. The sea was nearby. The air smelled like salt and damp grass, and everything felt quiet in that particular way that coastal places often do. We stayed in a small camper. It wasn't very big. There were 2 small bedrooms, one at each end, with a narrow shared space in the middle that served as a tiny living area. My twin and I slept together at one end of the camper. My parents slept at the other. The setup was simple and familiar. There was nothing unusual about that night, at least not at first. According to my parents, everything had been completely normal when they put us to bed. No strange behavior, no nightmares earlier in the week, nothing to suggest what was about to happen. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up screaming. Not crying, screaming. My parents say it wasn't the kind of scream a child lets out from a bad dream and then settles down from. It was raw, panicked, or full-body terror. They bolted awake and rushed toward our end of the camper, already alarmed by how intense it sounded. When they got there, I was sitting upright in bed, shaking, absolutely hysterical. I kept screaming about the lady. That's the phrase they still remember clearly. I was saying that the lady was trying to hurt us, that she was coming for us. My parents tried to calm me down, assuming I was having a nightmare, but the more they talked, the more frantic I became. I wasn't just scared for myself. I was screaming about my twin. I was begging them not to leave him alone. I was trying to wake him up, desperate to make sure he didn't get hurt. What scared my parents most wasn't just that I was afraid. It was what I was describing. They say I went into chilling detail. I described a woman covered in blood, and not just a little blood, completely soaked. I said she was holding an axe. I said she wanted to hurt all of us. I didn't speak like a child telling a vague monster story. I spoke with certainty, like I was seeing something in front of me. This was the early 1970s. There was no TV in our home, no violent movies, no exposure to horror stories. My parents were very careful about what we were exposed to. At 3 years old, I shouldn't have had the language or imagery to describe something like that so vividly. When my parents tried to pick me up and carry me down to their end of the camper to calm me, I completely lost it. They said I went berserk, kicking, screaming, thrashing, sobbing. I was screaming for my twin, trying to get back to him. I was convinced that if they took me away, the lady would get him. I wouldn't calm down. The only thing that finally worked was bringing both of us twins into their bed. They gathered us up and kept us close. All 4 of us crowded into that small space. Even then, I didn't fall asleep. My parents say I spent the entire night shaking, clutching them, staring at the bedroom door, watching it, waiting. I didn't scream anymore, but I didn't relax either. I stayed rigid, tense, like I was bracing myself for something to come through that door. My parents didn't sleep much at all that night. They stayed awake with me, confused and deeply unsettled. By morning, I had calmed down. I didn't mention the lady again. I didn't seem distressed. I acted like a normal 3-year-old. As far as I know, I never brought it up again, and I have absolutely no memory of it happening. My parents, on the other hand, never forgot. The next morning, I and my dad went to the campground's small store to buy cigarettes. While he was there, he struck up a casual conversation with the shopkeeper. They talked about the weather, the park, the usual small talk. At some point, my dad mentioned noticing the outline of a large foundation nearby. It was visible in the grass, like the footprint of a building that no longer existed. Given the area and the history, my dad assumed it had been destroyed during the war. He asked the shopkeeper if it had been bombed. The shopkeeper told him no. What he said next is what turned an already disturbing night into something much worse. According to the shopkeeper, the building hadn't been destroyed by bombing. It had burned down after a murder. The owner of the building had been attacked by her husband. He had stabbed her. Somehow, she survived long enough to fight back. In a frenzy, she had taken a hatchet and chopped him to pieces. She later died from her injuries. The fire came after. My dad has told this part of the story many times, and he always says the same thing. He says he felt the blood drain from his face. He says his stomach dropped. He says he nearly lost it right there in the shop. A woman, covered in blood, with a bladed weapon, trying to hurt people. The details matched far too closely for comfort. When my dad returned to the camper and told my mom what he'd learned, they were both shaken. They didn't say anything to me about it. They didn't ask me questions or try to fill in details. They were too afraid of influencing anything or making it worse. But from that moment on, they never doubted that something strange had happened that night. Or over the years, they've tried to explain it. Maybe I overheard something. Maybe I picked up on adult conversations without them realizing it. Maybe it was coincidence. But none of those explanations really satisfy them, especially given my age at the time and the specificity of what I described. What troubles them most is my focus on my twin. The way I wasn't just afraid, but protective. The way I seemed convinced that whatever I was seeing wasn't just a dream, but a real threat that could hurt someone else. I've asked them if anything else strange happened during that vacation. They always say no. Just that one night. No lingering fear. No repeated incidents. Just a single, intense event that left a permanent impression on them. For me, it's strange to think that something so terrifying could happen and leave no memory at all. It's like a blank space in my life that exists only through other people's recollections. I don't know what I believe about it. I don't know if I believe it was something paranormal or just an incredibly vivid night terror shaped by a place heavy with history. But I do know this. Even decades later, my parents still swear it happened exactly the way they remember it. They've never embellished it. They've never changed the details. And every time they tell it, there's a moment where they pause, shake their heads, and admit that they still don't understand it. My dad usually ends the story the same way, with a nervous laugh saying that he nearly scared himself to death in that shop. But the laugh never quite hides the fact that something about that night still unsettles him. Some places carry stories so deeply that they seem to bleed through time. And sometimes, for reasons we don't understand, those stories find their way into people who shouldn't possibly know them, even 3-year-olds. My best friend once told me a story that has stayed with me ever since, and every time I think about it, I still get chills. She wasn't someone who made things up or exaggerated for attention. She was practical, level-headed, and honestly a little skeptical about most things people called paranormal. That's probably why, when she told me this, I believed every word of it. At the time, she was working a pizza delivery job in Jefferson City, Tennessee. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and she liked the freedom of being on the road. Most of her shifts were late, especially on weekends, and that meant a lot of driving through quiet back roads and stretches of countryside where there were more trees than streetlights. Jefferson City has those long but dark rural roads where houses are spread far apart and the night feels heavier somehow, like it presses in on you. On this particular night, she was driving home after her shift had ended. It was late, well past midnight, and she was tired but relieved to be done. The roads were mostly empty, and the only sound was the hum of her engine and the tires on the pavement. She was driving her old Cutlass Sierra, a car she knew inside and out. It wasn't fancy, but it was reliable, and she trusted it. She told me she was moving at a decent speed, not speeding exactly, but definitely not crawling along either. There was no traffic, no reason to slow down, and nothing out of the ordinary at first. Just darkness, trees, and the narrow beam of her headlights cutting through the night. Then, without any warning at all, something happened. She said a person stepped out into the road directly in front of her car. Not from the side, where she might have seen movement or a shadow first, but almost as if they appeared out of thin air. 1 second there was nothing, and the next second there was a human figure right in her path. There was no time to brake, no time to swerve, no time to even process what she was seeing. She was certain she was about to hit someone, but she didn't. Instead of the sickening impact she expected, something impossible happened. She told me that the figure was suddenly no longer in front of the car. In the same instant, it was inside the car, right next to her. Not in the passenger seat the normal way someone would sit, but just there, present, passing through. Before she could scream or even fully turn her head, it was gone again, in front of the car. And then behind it, still in the road. All of this happened in a blink, faster than her mind could keep up with. Whatever it was, it went straight through her car. She said there was no sound of impact, no thud, no crack of glass, nothing. The car didn't jerk. The steering wheel didn't fight her. There was no physical sign that anything had touched the vehicle at all. But she knew deep down that something had passed through her space, through metal and glass and air, like none of it mattered. When she told me this part, I remember interrupting her immediately. I needed details. I needed something solid to hold on to. I asked her if she could tell whether it was a man or a woman. I asked if she saw any facial features, clothes, hair, anything. I asked if she looked in the rearview mirror to see if it was still standing there behind her. I asked if she saw a shadow, a reflection, anything at all. She shook her head and laughed nervously when she told me what she did next. She said she didn't look back. She didn't slow down. She didn't try to rationalize it. She floored it. She pressed that Cutlass Sierra to its absolute limits and got out of there as fast as she possibly could. She didn't care if there was a cop around the bend or if the engine sounded like it was about to come apart. Her only thought was to put as much distance between herself and that stretch of road as possible. She said her hands were shaking so badly she could barely keep them on the steering wheel. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mouth was dry, and she realized she had been holding her breath without noticing. She didn't stop until she reached a more populated area where there were lights and buildings and other cars. Only then did she slow down, pull into a gas station, and sit there with the engine still running while she tried to calm herself. Even then, she didn't get out of the car right away. She locked the doors. She looked around. She checked the back seat. She checked the passenger seat. She checked the mirrors. Everything looked normal. The car was normal. The night was normal. But she wasn't. When she finally drove the rest of the way home, she said she took a longer route, one with more lights, even though it added extra time. She didn't want to pass through that stretch of country road again, not that night, and honestly, not ever if she could help it. The next day, after she had slept a little and the sun was up, she tried to make sense of it. She went over it again and again in her mind, searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was her imagination filling in gaps too fast for her brain to catch up. But none of those explanations sat right with her. She was wide awake when it happened. She knew the road well, and she knew what she felt in that moment, the certainty that something impossible had intersected with her reality. What made it even harder to dismiss was the way it happened. It wasn't like seeing something strange at a distance. It wasn't a shadow at the edge of her vision. It was right there, in front of her, then inside her car, then behind her. Personal, invasive, close in a way that made her skin crawl even hours later. When she told me the story, she wasn't trying to scare me. She wasn't dramatic about it. If anything, she seemed uncomfortable talking about it, like saying it out loud made it more real than she wanted it to be. She never claimed to know what it was. She didn't call it a ghost or a spirit or anything specific. She just called it a person, because that's what it looked like in the split second she had to register it. A human shape, a human presence. She also told me that she avoided that road after that. If a delivery order came up that would have taken her through that area late at night, she would either trade with another driver or take a longer route. She didn't care about the extra gas or time. Her peace of mind was worth more than that. Years later, when we talked about it again, I asked her if she had ever experienced anything like that before or since. She said no. That was the only time something like that ever happened to her. That somehow made it worse. If it had been something that happened often, she might have been able to write it off as stress or imagination. But the fact that it was a single, isolated event made it stand out in her memory like a crack in reality that briefly opened and then sealed itself shut. I've thought about her story a lot over the years, especially when driving alone at night on empty roads. There's something about rural highways after dark that already feels unsettling. The way the darkness presses in beyond your headlights. The way your world shrinks to that narrow stretch of illuminated pavement ahead of you. Her story adds another layer to that feeling. It makes you wonder how much of reality we actually perceive, and how much slips past us unnoticed most of the time. It makes you think about moments where the normal rules might not apply, where something crosses over, even briefly, and leaves you questioning what you thought you understood. Every time I remember the way she described it, how calm but shaken she was, how she didn't embellish or dramatize it, I find it hard to dismiss. She had nothing to gain from telling the story. She didn't want attention or validation. She just needed someone to hear it. And every time I drive through a stretch of road like that, late at night with no one else around, I find myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter and keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead, hoping that whatever stepped out in front of her car that night never decides to step out in front of mine. Before the dream itself makes any sense, there's some context that matters. I'm Persian, and my mother's side of the family has a history that feels heavy, even when no one talks about it directly. My great-grandmother gave birth to many sons. 5, at least, that I know of. Growing up, I was always aware of them, even though some of them were rarely spoken about. What stands out most isn't their individual personalities, but the way they all felt the same. It's hard to explain without sounding strange, but they carried the same presence, the same energy. Not identical in appearance, not identical in voice, but something deeper. When they entered a room, you felt it. When they spoke, you listened. It was as if they were variations of the same soul. That sense of shared presence is important, because it's the same feeling that appears in the dream. The dream has repeated itself throughout my entire childhood, not every night, not even every month, but often enough that it became familiar, predictable, and yet it never lost its power. Every time it happened, it felt exactly the same. The dream always begins with a scent. Sometimes I'm walking up a staircase. The stairs are tall and wide, stretching upward in a way that feels both slow and inevitable. Other times, I'm inside an elevator, standing still as it rises. There's no fear in this part of the dream, no urgency, just the quiet sense that I'm going somewhere I'm supposed to go. I'm never rushing. I'm never anxious. I just move upward steadily. When I reach the top, the world changes completely. Instead of a building, instead of a city, instead of anything logical, and I step into a tropical oasis. The contrast is always striking. Imagine standing on top of a skyscraper in New York City, expecting concrete and steel, and instead finding dense jungle stretching endlessly in every direction. Lush greenery, thick leaves, vines, and above it all the sun burning bright in a perfectly clear sky. The light in this place is intense, but not painful. It's warm, golden, alive. It doesn't feel like a dream environment that fades at the edges. It feels solid, real, more real than most dreams ever do. The air feels heavy with warmth and life. I can't remember specific smells or sounds, but I always have the sense that the place is breathing. At the top, waiting there, is a man. I never see him approach. He's just there, standing calmly, facing the horizon. And the strangest part is that I know him without knowing him. I don't recognize his face in the way you recognize a relative or a stranger. I don't know his name. I don't remember ever meeting him in waking life. But the moment I see him, I know who he is supposed to be. He radiates the same aura as my mother's uncles, the same presence, the same quiet gravity. It's not threatening. It's not overwhelming. It's familiar in a way that makes my chest feel tight, like recognition without memory. In the dream, there's a moment where it clicks. A realization settles in, clear and gentle. He could be one of them. He could be my mother's uncle. Not logically, not with certainty, but emotionally, spiritually. It feels right in the way dreams sometimes feel right without explanation. When that realization comes, we both smile. Oh, there are no words exchanged, no questions asked, no explanations offered. We stand there together, watching the sun. The scene feels timeless, like it could last forever, and at the same time, like it's already ending. There's no sadness in that moment, just peace, acceptance. Then, slowly, he disappears. Not violently, not suddenly. He doesn't vanish in a flash or fade into mist. It's more like he simply ceases to be there, as if he was never separate from the light in the first place. And when he's gone, I turn around and begin the descent. I walk back down the staircase, or the elevator carries me downward. There's no panic, no attempt to follow him, no sense of loss yet. I just go back the way I came, calm and quiet. That's always where the dream ends. But the dream itself isn't the part that haunts me. What happens when I wake up is what changed everything. Every single time I wake from this dream, my entire body and mind are overtaken by the same overwhelming sensation. It's not fear. It's not sadness. It's something closer to desperation, but cleaner, sharper. A need, a pull, a certainty that I must find this man. It's as if every cell in my body is screaming that I'm supposed to find him, that he exists somewhere, not just in the dream, that there is a purpose tied to him, and that purpose involves me. The feeling is so intense that it's almost painful. It's not emotional in the way grief or panic is emotional. It's instinctive, like hunger or thirst, but deeper. I've never experienced anything else like it. Other dreams fade when you wake up. Even vivid nightmares lose their grip once you realize you're safe. This doesn't fade. It follows me into consciousness fully formed. For a brief window of time, the dream feels more real than waking life, and the urge to find him feels more important than anything else I've ever wanted. I've woken up sweating before. I've woken up shaken. I've woken up confused. But this is different. This is the only dream that ever made me feel like I was being pulled toward a destiny I didn't understand. And then, Inevitably, it begins to fade. If I stay awake long enough, the intensity weakens, the certainty dulls, logic creeps back in, life resumes its normal shape. Eventually, the feeling becomes distant, like trying to remember a powerful emotion you once felt but can't fully access anymore. If I force myself back to sleep, the craving fades faster, and every time I feel a strange sense of loss, even though I can't explain what I've lost. As a child, I didn't have the language to describe this. I just knew it mattered. As I grew older, the dreams continued, and with age came understanding, and with understanding came fear. Because there is something about my family history that makes this impossible to dismiss. One of my mother's uncles went missing during the Iran-Iraq War around 30 years ago. He never came home. His body was never found. He never made contact. No letters, no messages, nothing. He is what Americans would call missing in action. He simply vanished. In Persian families, especially ones shaped by war, absence has weight. Missing isn't the same as dead. Death allows grief to settle into something defined. Missing leaves everything suspended. Hope never fully dies, and neither does mourning. It lingers, the unresolved, passed down quietly through generations. Growing up, I knew about him, but he was never discussed in detail. He existed more as a shadow than a story, a name spoken carefully, a loss acknowledged but never explored too deeply. As I got older and began to connect the pieces, the dream became harder to ignore. I can't say the man in the dream is him. I have no proof. I don't even know what that would mean. But the aura is the same. The sense of belonging is the same. And the feeling that I'm supposed to find him feels tied to something older than me, older than memory. What disturbs me most isn't the idea that the dream might be supernatural. It's the way it feels purposeful, as if the dream isn't random imagery created by a sleeping brain, but a message that never quite finishes itself. I've tried to rationalize it. Children absorb family grief even when it isn't spoken aloud. Trauma passes down silently. Maybe my mind created a symbol to process a loss I didn't consciously understand. Maybe the man represents absence, longing, or unresolved history. But no explanation fully accounts for the intensity of the feeling when I wake up. It doesn't feel symbolic in the way dreams usually do. It feels directional, like a compass suddenly spinning into alignment and pointing somewhere specific, even if I don't know where. The fact that the dream always ends the same way makes it worse. There's no variation, no progression, no conclusion, just ascent, recognition, disappearance, descent, over and over again, across years. Sometimes I wonder if the dream stopped because I grew older, or because I learned to suppress the feeling fast enough that it couldn't fully take hold anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I didn't fight it, if I let myself stay awake with that urge, instead of forcing myself back to sleep. But I'm afraid of what that might open. I don't tell people this story because it sounds like nonsense unless you've lived with it. People hear recurring dream and think it's just psychology, and maybe it is, but psychology doesn't usually leave you with the certainty that your life is connected to someone you've never met in a place you've never been. I don't know what I believe about it. I don't know if the dream is memory, imagination, or something else entirely. I don't know if the man is real, symbolic, or something in between. All I know is that for most of my childhood, I carried this quiet, aching sense that someone was missing and that somehow, impossibly, I was meant to find him. Even now, writing this, I can feel a faint echo of that pull. It's weaker than it used to be, but it's still there, buried deep, waiting for something to trigger it again. Some dreams fade with time. This one didn't. It just learned how to hide. I vacation in Maine every single year. It's one of the few constants in my life, something that has stayed the same no matter how much everything else has changed. We always stay at my grandparents' house, which sits in the middle of the state, far away from anything resembling a city. It's deeply rural. Most of the roads are dirt. A lot of the houses are abandoned. Some look like people just up and left one day and never came back. There are stretches where you can drive for miles without seeing another car. And at night, the darkness feels heavier than anywhere else I've ever been. On my grandparents' road, there's a small cemetery. It's old, quiet, and tucked into a field like it belongs there. A little farther down the same road, there's an even stranger sight, a very old, small house that's been abandoned for as long as I can remember. My grandparents have lived up there for years longer than I've been visiting in the summers, and even they can't tell me the last time anyone lived in it. It's just always been there, slowly rotting, leaning into itself, windows dark and empty. The house is fenced off with barbed wire and clearly marked as no trespassing. Even from the road, you can tell it's unsafe. Parts of it look like they might collapse if someone got too close. Still, it has that pull that abandoned places often have, especially when you're young and curious and surrounded by friends who think fear is funny. Last year, during senior week, I was up in Maine with some friends. It was late, and like a lot of late-night ideas, this one came from boredom mixed with adrenaline. The guys I was with decided it would be fun to walk down to the abandoned house at night. There were 4 of us total, and I was the only girl. I didn't want to go at first. Something about it made me uneasy. But I also knew that if I didn't go, they'd probably do something stupid. They were already joking about climbing the fence or getting closer than they should. I figured if I went along, I could at least make sure nobody did anything dangerous or illegal. So I agreed, even though every instinct I had told me it was a bad idea. It was a full moon that night, not just bright, but huge and white, the kind that lights up the landscape so clearly that shadows look sharper than usual. Before we left, I went down to the woods near my grandparents' place and grabbed 2 wooden stakes. I told myself it was partly for humor and partly as a joke, but if I'm being honest, it was also partly for protection. I remember thinking, half seriously, what would Buffy do? And laughing it off, even though my heart was already beating faster than normal. We only had 2 flashlights between the 4 of us, but the moon was so bright that we barely needed them. Everything was visible in a strange, silver-blue way. The trees cast long shadows. The dirt road looked pale and flat. The night felt quiet, but not peaceful. As we walked, the guys decided they wanted to stop at the cemetery first. Surprisingly, that didn't bother me much. The cemetery sits in the middle of a field, wide open, with no trees crowding it. Under the full moon, you could see every headstone clearly. There were no dark corners, no places for anything to hide. We walked through quietly, joked a little, and moved on without incident. Somehow, the abandoned house felt much worse than the cemetery. After the graveyard, we kept walking. To get to the house, you have to pass a small farm, more like a farmette than a full working farm. The owners keep a bright light on in their yard for security. That light spills out across the field, but it doesn't reach very far. The abandoned house sits about 1,000 feet beyond where the light fades out. As long as we were in the glow of that light, everything felt normal enough. The moment we stepped out of it, something changed. I can't explain it logically, but my blood ran cold instantly. It wasn't gradual. It was immediate, like stepping into a different atmosphere. Goosebumps broke out across my arms. My stomach tightened. The night suddenly felt too quiet, too still. It was eerie in a way that's hard to describe unless you've felt it yourself. The guys felt it too. Almost immediately, they started talking about going back. They were suddenly nervous, cracking jokes that didn't land, glancing behind us more than ahead. At that point, we were about 30 feet away from where the house would come into view. We couldn't see it yet, but we were close enough that it felt ridiculous to turn back without at least looking. I didn't want to have come all that way for nothing, so I pushed past them, more out of stubbornness than bravery. I told myself someone had to be the adult in the situation, and apparently that someone was me. As I moved ahead of them, I did one last slow sweep of the surrounding area with my flashlight. I wanted to make sure nothing unexpected was nearby. Animals, people, anything. This is important. The farm we had passed earlier has animals, cows, cats, horses. I knew this. Earlier that same day, I had seen a horse in the paddock. Because of that, the moment we reached the edge of the farm property, I made sure to look for it. Horses are big, and surprising one at night is a bad idea. I did a full sweep of the paddock. The horse was not there. There was nothing there. No movement, no shapes, no eyes reflecting back at me, just empty field. Satisfied, I turned my attention back toward the direction of the abandoned house. As I took one more step forward, I swung my flashlight around one final time, almost out of habit. That's when my beam landed on it. In the darkness, just beyond the reach of the farm's light, stood something enormous. It was hulking and tall, easily 7 feet if it stood upright the way it appeared to be. Its body was covered in hair, thick and dark, not like fur exactly, but not like normal human hair either. The shape was wrong, the proportions were wrong. And its eyes. Its eyes were massive and glowing, reflecting the flashlight back at me in a way that made my stomach drop. They weren't low to the ground. They weren't off to the sides. They were on the front of its head. The thing looked like a standing man-shaped creature, but not human, not anything I recognized. It was solid, not a shadow or a trick of light. It was there. I screamed. I don't mean I yelped or gasped. I mean I let out a full, bone-chilling scream that tore out of my throat before I could stop it. The sound of my own voice scared me almost as much as what I was seeing. And the guys didn't stop to look. The moment I screamed, they turned and ran, full sprint, back toward the road, back toward the light, yelling and swearing and tripping over themselves. I don't blame them. Fear does that to people. I ran too. I didn't look back. I didn't try to get a better look. Every instinct in my body told me to get away as fast as possible. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. My legs barely felt like they were touching the ground. We didn't stop running until we were well past the cemetery and back on the road near my grandparents' house, where the darkness felt less oppressive and the familiar shapes of trees and buildings grounded us again. Once we caught our breath, the guys started laughing nervously, trying to downplay it. They asked what I saw. When I told them, they immediately said it had to have been the horse. I told them no. They insisted it was. Big animal, dark shape, shiny eyes. Easy mistake, they said. But I know horses. I've spent my entire life riding them, training them, working with them. I know how they move. I know how they stand. I know how their eyes reflect light. Horses' eyes are on the sides of their heads, not the front. Their silhouettes are unmistakable if you've spent any real time around them. What I saw did not look like a horse. Not the shape, not the height, not the way it stood, and definitely not the eyes. To this day, the guys still tell the story as if I just got spooked by an animal. They laugh about it, shrug it off, and say the adrenaline made me imagine things. And maybe that's what they need to believe. But I can't. I've replayed that moment in my head countless times. The way the night felt when we stepped out of the light. The certainty I felt when my flashlight hit that shape. The immediate, overwhelming terror that came from somewhere deeper than thought. I don't know what it was. I don't claim it was a monster or something supernatural. I don't have a name for it. I don't even have proof. All I know is that it wasn't a horse. and it wasn't something I recognized as normal. That abandoned house is still there. The cemetery is still there. The road hasn't changed much at all. I still go to Maine every year, but I never walk down that road at night anymore. Some experiences don't need an explanation to stay with you. They lodge themselves somewhere deep, quietly reshaping the way you see the world. That night did that to me. And every time I drive past that stretch of road, I remember those eyes staring straight back at me from the dark. When I was very young, my dad had a job that required us to move constantly. We never stayed in one place long enough for it to feel permanent. Just as I would start to recognize streets or feel like a house was home, we would pack everything up and move again. At that age, I didn't question it. It was just life. New houses, new schools, new neighbors, over and over. When I was 5 years old and my sister was 4, my dad's job brought us to a small town in Virginia. It was quiet, the kind of place where people waved at each other on the street and nothing ever seemed to happen. Compared to some of the places we had lived before, it felt calm and slow. My parents rented an old house on a street called Church Street. The house itself looked like something out of another time. It was tall and narrow, with creaky wooden floors and door frames that had clearly been painted over dozens of times. The windows were big and let in a lot of light during the day, but at night the shadows felt heavy and strange. Even as a child, I remember feeling uneasy in that house, though I didn't have the words for it then. It just didn't feel friendly. Not long after we moved in, my sister and I started having night terrors. At first, my parents weren't overly alarmed. Night terrors happen to kids, especially young kids who have just moved to a new place. New surroundings, new sounds, unfamiliar routines. All of that can mess with a child's sleep. But it didn't take long for my parents to realize that something about this was very wrong. These weren't normal nightmares. When the night terrors happened, my sister and I couldn't be woken up. We would scream and cry, thrashing in our beds, completely hysterical. Our mom would rush in and try to hold us, try to calm us down, but we would fight her like she was a stranger. We screamed for our mama while pushing our actual mother away. That alone terrified her. What made it worse was what we were saying. We weren't just crying, we were saying things, specific things. We would scream about dead people. We would cry that there were so many dead people. We would say we were going to die, that we didn't want to die, that we were scared. We said things no 5- and 4-year-old should be thinking about, let alone screaming in the middle of the night. And we were saying the same things. My sister and I shared a room, and when these episodes happened, they often happened at the same time. Even when they didn't, or the content was always the same. We described the same fears, the same images, the same overwhelming sense of doom. It wasn't one child influencing the other in the moment. Sometimes one of us would start screaming first, and the other would follow, already locked into the same terror. Our mom tried everything she could think of. She turned on lights, sang to us, held us, spoke calmly, even tried waking us with cold washcloths. Nothing worked. We weren't really awake, but we weren't asleep either. We were trapped somewhere in between, unreachable. When morning came, my sister and I were perfectly normal. We didn't remember the night terrors. We didn't talk about dead people or dying during the day. We played, laughed, ate breakfast, and acted like ordinary little kids. That contrast made everything even more disturbing. It was like two different versions of us existed, depending on whether the sun was up or down. After several nights of this, my mom was exhausted and terrified. She wasn't someone who panicked easily. She was practical, grounded, and not prone to superstition. But watching both of her children scream in terror night after night about the same horrifying things without being able to reach them broke something in her sense of safety. She eventually mentioned it to our new neighbors. She didn't do it dramatically. She didn't accuse the house or suggest anything supernatural. She just said that her daughters were having horrible night terrors and that it felt wrong. She was probably hoping someone would say, "Oh yes, that happens to kids here," or offer some harmless explanation. Instead, the neighbors went quiet. Very quiet. They exchanged looks, the kind adults do when they're deciding whether or not to say something they probably shouldn't. Then one of them asked what street we lived on. When my mum said Church Street, their reaction changed completely. They told her the history of the street. Church Street had gotten its name because hundreds of years earlier it had been part of the church's property. Long before modern medicine, long before proper sanitation, the town had been devastated by a massive cholera outbreak. People died quickly and in huge numbers. Entire families were wiped out. The small cemetery attached to the church filled up almost immediately. With no room left and no time to properly bury the dead, the town dug a massive pit. Bodies were placed there in bulk, men, women, children. They weren't buried individually. They were thrown in together, covered over, and left there. Later, much later, when the town expanded and time dulled the memory of the tragedy, the land was paved over and turned into a street, Church Street. My mum said she felt sick when she heard this. The neighbors told her this wasn't some obscure rumor. It was local history. People in town knew about it, even if they didn't talk about it much. The mass grave had never been moved. It was simply built over. That night, when my sister and I had another episode, something in my mom snapped. She told my dad that they had to move. Immediately. She didn't care about the lease. She didn't care about money. She didn't care about his job. She told him that if he didn't get us out of that area, she would leave with us herself. She truly believed that something was happening to her children. To this day, my mom believes my sister and I were being haunted. Not in a dramatic movie-style way, but in a quiet, invasive one. She believes that the souls of two little girls who had died during the cholera outbreak were somehow attaching themselves to us, that we were reliving their fear, their deaths, their terror, that during those night terrors we weren't just dreaming, but being overtaken by something that didn't belong to us. She believes it so strongly that even now, decades later, she can't talk about it for long. Whenever the subject comes up, she changes it quickly. Her voice tightens. Her eyes go distant. She doesn't want to revisit it, and honestly, I don't blame her. Whatever she witnessed in that house clearly left a deep mark on her. We moved not long after that. The night terrors stopped, not gradually, not slowly fading away. They stopped completely. My sister and I slept peacefully again. No screaming, no hysteria, no talk of dead people, no terror. Just normal childhood sleep. I have no memory of any of it. I don't remember the house. I don't remember the dreams. I don't remember the fear. Everything I know about it comes from my parents, especially my mother. But the way she talks about it, the way her voice still shakes slightly when she mentions those nights, tells me that whatever happened was very real to her. I've tried to think of logical explanations. Shared night terrors, stress from moving, children feeding off each other's fears. Maybe my sister and I picked up on adult anxiety without realizing it. Maybe something about the house triggered our imaginations in similar ways, but there are parts of it that still bother me. The fact that we dreamed the same things, the fact that we spoke about death in such specific, emotional terms, the fact that the night terrors began almost immediately after moving in and stopped completely when we left, the fact that my mother, a woman who doesn't believe in ghost stories or superstition, is still convinced something unnatural was happening. I don't know what I believe. I don't walk around thinking I was possessed or haunted. I don't claim that ghosts were involved. But I also can't completely dismiss the idea that places carry memory, that land remembers suffering, that sometimes, especially with children who don't have filters or defenses yet, That memory can leak through. What stays with me most isn't fear, it's sadness. The idea that so many people died in terror, buried without dignity, forgotten under pavement. The idea that 2 little girls might have died, scared and confused, calling for their mother, the same way my sister and I were screaming for hours. Whether that connection is real or imagined, I don't know. All I know is that my mother saw something in us that frightened her enough to uproot our lives overnight. And whatever it was, it stopped the moment we left that place. That's enough to make me wonder. And honestly, I'm okay not knowing more than that.